So hi everyone, it's nice to see you all again. Again, my name is Hunter Hinson. I'm a student at the Oxford Internet Institute and a Shirley Scholar here, as well as the logistics director for the summit. And so again, it's just a pleasure to have you all here. But for this specific session, it's my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce someone who has been working for over 2 decades in the social impact of new and emerging technologies. She's the founder and executive director of research consultancy Careful Industries and its sister social enterprise, Promising Trouble. Previously, she founded and worked as CEO of the UK-based responsible technology think tank Everyone, as well as worked for companies like the BBC, Microsoft, BT, and Channel 4, and along with a stunt in the digital art world. She's a member of the Ofcom Content Board, and in 2019 was awarded the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for her contributions to the arts and science and public service outside of the public service. Please join me in welcoming and giving a big round of applause to Rachel Coldicutt.
Great. Do I put this in here? Hello. Is that in the right place? Can you hear me? Right, hello. So I think I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes. Hang on. Great. In quite a sort of high-level way, and then maybe we can get more specific when we talk in the questions. So, bit distracting. Maybe the people upstairs could be a bit quieter. Would that be okay? Can you hear me? Shh, thanks. Thank you, everybody. Right, so, I am going to talk about how I think sometimes when we think about technology, we think about it from a technological approach, but I'm really most interested in thinking about it from a social approach. And I think as a technologist, it's very tempting, you know, when the thing that you're holding is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But really, when we're making products, they're not just the things that stay perfectly in our code or schematics. They have a life of their own later on. So I run a little research organization, and we do a range of different things. We work with governments, we work with big tech companies to help them understand what's likely to happen in the next 20, 50, 100 years and how to be more responsible. And we do a lot of piloting and hands-on work that is about kind of what would happen if we turned the paradigm around. And so rather than technology being a thing that is as is currently, I think, ingrained, a very kind of top-down corporate focused entity, what would happen if it was influenced and changed more by community power? And because of this, I've accidentally ended up organizing an event in a week and a half, which is just just ahead of the summit in Bletchley. And we're bringing together 160 civil society thinkers, activists, campaigners, doers, in order to talk about the extent to which AI really is a social problem, right? It's not something that can only be solved through code. So what do I mean when I talk about it like this? What do I mean by it being a social problem? I mean it's a problem of power and influence. I mean it's an issue of environmental, economic, and political importance. I mean it has implications for equity and justice, has implications, everything that we make is, you know, if it's used by tens or hundreds or thousands or millions of people, we're unlikely to be able to control everything about it. And one of the things that has been perplexing me a lot over the last 8 or 9 months is the way that the debate about who gets to set the rules around AI has been, I think, kicked into a fundamentally not very helpful place. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and feel free to put your hand up. Who in the room is very concerned about existential risk? Come on, big hands, like all the way up, okay. Who is more concerned about current risks that are created by AI? Right. Thank you very much. You see, I'm speaking to a home crowd. So the thing is that I think one of the things that is happening in pushing risk out to be something that is existential, that is happening further down the line, is it is taking the power away from everyone who is concerned about what is happening now. It is taking the power away from everyone who's been refused entry at borders. It's taking the power away from people who have been wrongly committed crimes, who have not received credit, who've been told that essays have been written by a bot, and maybe these issues are not all quite as important as each other. But what happens a lot of the time with technologies is that they become tools to escape. They become ways of hiding what's actually happening. And they, and the more that we push out further and further down the line, the risks that are created, the more we turn them into things that no one is able to solve, right? And I think it's an issue of power. Now, I was very involved in the early days of the online safety bill, which, I don't know if anyone here knows very much about it, but it's been on a very interesting journey for anyone who is interested in thinking about risk and how we think about technological risk. One of the things that's happened to the online safety bill is that it has been held up for years and years and years because people have been trying to make a list of everything that might go wrong, right? And what keeps happening is extra things are added to the list. And there's an extraordinary thing where the specificity of the drafting means that there's like a clause to say that up the skirting is illegal and down the blousing, right? No one has been able to think that potentially in photography as a whole is at risk, or to even sort of capture at a high enough level of fidelity what the real harm is that is being caused, right? And it's likely that in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, something else will turn up. And there will have to be some sort of arcane thing that happens where someone proposes a change to the bill that takes 1.5 years to go through. And I think what we need to think about when we think about regulating is if we focus on risks, we're thinking about naming specific things. If we're thinking about rights, we're thinking about the things that might happen. And the thing about risk-based is it's very technocratic, right? It can make it like it's the kind of thing that people who like drawing pictures of systems really like, right? If you're drawing flow charts of risks, it makes it feel like you can put a box around an issue and say, oh yeah, like this happens and then this happens and the flow goes here. But like life is not really like that. And and I think at the moment, the issues that we have around like a very tiny number of people calling the shots about the sorts of risks that might be created is that the risks that occur to Sam Altman or Elon Musk, right, are not the risks that most of us genuinely face, and I think it's really important to remember that, risk is a very subjective thing, whereas rights hopefully are objective. So, given that really this is all about power, I think one of the things that I would like us to think about is how do we manage for complexity, and not only technological complexity, but the complexity of real life. So, like, this is an old drawing. It's F.W. Gill's thinking about some of the ways that technologies hit the world and the actors who have influence on that. I think one of the issues here is that users is on the edge, and I think users ought to be in the middle. Because if nothing else, I think the last 20 years have shown us that no technology is really completely made until people use it. If we think about, in 2004, our paradigm of the phone and what we thought it was able to do, I mean, who actually uses a phone to make calls anymore, right? It's like we change things by using them. And so I'm going to end with a couple of thoughts and then 4 questions for everyone who is making products to, help you think maybe slightly differently. So my main point here is that if we prioritize a risk-based approach, then we are imagining that technologies that we are making are finished at the point of deployment. But in, the thing that actually happens is everybody who uses a thing changes it. And I would really encourage everybody here to think about the ways that users use things as a part of production. It isn't something that happens afterwards, right? The life of your product goes on and on and on. And it isn't possible for any of us to predict every use, every consequence, every potential outcome. And I think a risk-based approach gives whoever is making those lists a kind of godlike status, whereas actually, it's something that we're all doing together. So with that in mind, I will leave you with 4 things to think about as you are either commissioning, deploying, making, regulating, whatever it is you happen to do. So the first one is pretty, should this exist? And nobody really asked that, right? And it's the Jeff Goldblum axiom from Jurassic Park. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. The next is, how are others likely to change it? And what are the things that are not imaginable to you that are likely to happen further down the road? And this one here, I think, is the most important in a way, is how will it be maintained? Every technology lives a life of its own, right? And to think that just because you've created it, you're able to put your arms around it and hold it is probably really over-optimistic. And I think I will end on this one, which is that every time you make a product or a service or commission it, the most important thing really to think about is if it all goes wrong, how do you close it down? On which I will end. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Rachel. We have about 14 minutes, so if anyone has any questions, Rachel, I'll let you maybe pick who you'd like to ask, and we'll have a volunteer bring a mic around. But if you have a question, please feel free.
Maybe I will take us back to a more compelling slide. There we are. Right. Anybody? Oh, over there.
Just on the slide, should these things exist? Should certain things exist?
Oh, I think there's a mic coming to you.
Is that mic working? Okay. Just on the idea of certain AI things that shouldn't exist. Is there a case for sort of, at the outset, at the government level, sort of banning certain uses or certain types of AI? I'm thinking of things like PIMIs or the technology, I think it's developed by Clearwater AI.
Right,
basically an AI trained on billions of pictures of people's faces, which can, if you just give them a picture of someone's face, identify who that person is. Has extreme implications for the surveillance state. I mean, authoritarian governments would love this stuff. And it is being created, it is being used by law enforcement agencies. So is there a case for sort of those kinds of things just being banned outright because of the implications for privacy, so sort of from a rights-based perspective?
So I would say in that instance, it isn't only the privacy implications that are an issue, but there's not really time to get into that. I think one of the things that technologists really overlook is that the rule of law is a thing and has existed for quite a long time, and that the social contract is a thing as well. And, if I go back to maybe 2010, you would quite often go to technology events, and people would have the slide that said maybe Airbnb is the biggest hotel company, but it doesn't own any hotels. Uber is the biggest taxi company, etc. And the message of that was disrupt ahead of the law, right? And I think for the last decade at least, the idea that as an innovator, one has the right to disrupt ahead of the law and then change the law afterwards has become extremely normalized. And we actually have in the UK already plenty of legislation that puts good barriers around those things. And that actually the real issue, I think, is that legislators, parliamentarians, policy makers don't really know enough about technology to know when those laws are being broken. And so really, I think rather than anybody trying to make a list of things that ought to be banned, we need better ways of working that can understand how the social contract we have now can be upheld, rather than handing it over to 5 guys in Silicon Valley, which is what lots of people appear to want to do. At the back, over there.
Thank you for that. That was fascinating. I was just wondering if we're sort of talking about pivoting away from risk and looking more at rights. I was just wondering which rights how do we define those rights? Which ones do you think are the crucial rights to be talking about as part of this discussion?
And so to go back to the idea of what technologists get to invent and what they don't get to invent, I think human rights are not something we're going to invent in this room here, right? And I think it's very important. If you are looking at the globally recognized and established set of human rights, and your technology is not compliant with those, then it's not the rights that are the issue, it's the technology, And I don't know if anyone has seen at the end of 2022, the White House published the blueprint towards an AI Bill of Rights, And that is a really good list of sensible ways of thinking about things. But I think, I think another thing I would say is in my old job, in about 2018 or 2019, we had an open list that people could add every set of AI principles or guidelines or whatever they came across. And in 2019, I think we had 250, right? Because there's something, I think, irresistible to technologists about making their own rules, rather than saying, okay, the Bill of Human Rights exists, rather than saying that Sustainable Development Goals exist, it's like, let's make our own list. And so I would really encourage everyone to look up what works already, rather than trying to kind of hack democracy. Over here, if that's okay, we've got, thank you. Oh, right, you and then you, if that's okay.
Hi, my name is Justyna Kurczawinska and I work for the media sector, for public service media, but the question is not really about the media specifically. I mean, we are looking at generative AI since, as you said, people are using it, so since November 2022. But in a way, certain things we are discussing feels like we've been there with the social media revolution, with the Arab Spring and everything that came after. So how would you say, how do you feel that we are, taking lessons in addressing these new issues? And have we learned anything? Because it's not like we are discovering all these questions we've been asking ourselves, we've been there. So this is just a different dimension.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is that like clever people love making problems, and it can be really difficult to, as I was saying, look at the good work that's happened previously. So there are people who've been working on internet law for 30 years now, right? There are many precedents, and that actually we can be doing a better job of looking at what has happened previously and learning from that. And I think one of the reasons that doesn't happen is because that doesn't feel novel or innovative. And so I would suggest that rather than constantly looking for new ways to regulate or legislate, we look for old ways, but actually make them happen. Which is the harder thing than coming up with new rules, I think, probably. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I had an extremely similar question about historical precedents. So maybe could you just provide an example or two of successful historical precedents that were rights-based and centered on the user?
Yeah. So I think one of the most interesting things, if we look back, now, I'm not going to get the date right here, but so when Mary Warnock looked at IVF in the, I think, late 80s, I'm going to say, IVF at that time was something that lots of people were very concerned about. The idea that people would have a godlike ability to create life was extremely concerning. And through a process of deliberative engagement with the public and experts, Mary Warnock came up with a really good set of recommendations for how to deal with IVF. And the most important thing, I think, from those findings was the idea that there's not one thing that will work for everyone, right? That we are a plural society. We are a post-religious society, or we contain many, many religions, but it is still possible to come to and articulate values and things that work. And it's really worth it. It's, Wellcome hold the documents now, and they're very easy to find online. So that's one great example. But then, there's loads of others. If we think about how, in the 1920s with cars, everybody was just was just running everybody over until they realised that that didn't work, right? You know, and they were like, let's not do that anymore. So I think it's very, very easy to think that these are new problems, but there's lots of examples in history. Do we have time for one more? Yeah, one more. Oh, why don't we do, we've got two over there. Could we do those together and then see if, I don't know, they pithily wrap up?
Thank you very much. I'm Steve Wood. I'm an independent data protection consultant. I used to be the Deputy Commissioner at the ICO. Really enjoyed the sort of interplay between the question about rights and risk. And I think one thing I'm learning about in relation to AI at the moment, particularly in the context of data protection rights, is how the rights are often be applied on an individual basis. But I mean, certainly I was at a conference last week which looked at rights from a group level in terms of indigenous communities. So I just wondered if you had any brief reflections on how we consider rights at sort of a group or societal level, and not always sort of individual rights that are exercised. But thank you.
That is huge, but let's see if what happens with the person behind.
Hi. My question's on kind of genuine efforts of companies and governments to involve civil society in the decision-making process. Kind of, have you seen good examples of that, and how do we promote those like really important spaces for dialogue?
Okay, I'm going to take that one first because I've got like a quick answer, which is like certainly, and I can only really speak from the perspective of someone in the UK, the last 4 years have been absolutely terrible, particularly with government. Government, since 2019, has had no interest in speaking to anyone who doesn't agree with them, which is a problem, right? And I think one of the things I quite often get asked to do is to be like the token difficult person on like at a corporate event. And I think what I would say is that the companies who try really hard are not the ones who have publicly known ethics boards who are doing it as a marketing thing. I'm involved with a couple of companies who I can't name, who take a much more internalized approach, where at the very beginning of product development, they start to review and try to understand what is likely to happen. And I think there's the thing is that I think from a policy perspective, technology is so knotted up with short-term economic gain that it's very difficult for anyone to really have long-term democratically driven engagement. So I think it's a work in progress. And then just lastly, on collective rights, you know, I think one of the most interesting and problematic things that taking a sort of libertarian first model of individualized personhood into technology has enabled us to think is that we as an individual are the most important thing. And that actually, in all rights, right, we have to look after each other, and we have no rights if we aren't acting in community. And that I would say overall that shift towards individualizing and personalizing is a way of taking away collective agency. So I would point you to, there's lots of great work coming out of, there's a group of indigenous leaders from New Zealand, Brazil, I can't remember the other country, I'm sorry, who are creating the fair care data governance rules, and I would really encourage everyone to look at those. Thank you.